Rowan Mercer spent 30 long years building an empire his daddy only ever dreamed about. Thousands of wild acres, hundreds of cattle, and a last name that made every other rancher in the room sit up real straight. He believed with that stubborn, bone-deep certainty a man gets that he had flat-out mastered everything this brutal frontier could throw at him. Then his brother's widow rolled into town with a carpetbag and a bad habit of asking questions nobody else had ever dared to ask. And in one single evening, sitting at his heavy oak desk, staring at his numbers, Rowan figured out the mighty empire he built had been bleeding out for nearly a decade. He just happened to be too blind to see it. Or maybe he just looked the other way. If this tale grips you, hit that like button and comment what city you are watching from. I want to see how far this tale travels. Now the morning Celeste Whitaker reached the Mercer ranch. The sky hung like a sheet of rusted iron, flat gray and promising absolutely nothing. Rowan stood on the porch with a tin cup of black coffee going cold in his grip, eyes locked on the dusty road. He knew she was coming. His lawyer sent word 3 weeks back, explaining that under the strict terms of his late brother Daniel's estate, Celeste held a rightful claim to ranch assets, namely that quarter section Daniel got as a wedding gift 12 years ago, plus whatever hard value that dirt now held. Rowan read that piece of paper twice, tossed it on his desk, and never touched it again. He figured it was just some legal dust settling. Celeste would arrive, they would parley, she would take a fair cash payout and ride right back to wherever she had been hiding since Daniel passed. Back east to her family's wealth, he figured. But the rig rattling up his road was not at all what he pictured. He expected high society, a fancy hired coach with trunks stacked tall, the grand entrance a banker's daughter makes when she wants to remind a cowboy exactly who is boss. What rolled up instead was a dusty livery rig, one tired horse, one driver, and Celeste sitting up tall, a worn leather satchel across her lap, like she was walking straight into a high-stakes frontier boardroom. She was 34, maybe 35. Dark hair tied back, plain and simple, wearing a gray traveling dress that had swallowed trail dust, and she did not care. When the rig halted, she hopped down in the dirt before the driver even flinched, studied the main house with a cold look Rowan could not read, then locked eyes with him. "Rowan," she said. "Celeste." He stepped down off the porch. They shook hands. It was the stiff, awkward grip of two folks who had crossed paths exactly 4 times in their lives and never once actually enjoyed the company. "How is the trail out here?" "Long," she told him, "and mighty dry." "Come inside. I have coffee." They sat in the front room, the one his mother always called the parlor, though cowboys never used that word. The wood furniture was heavy as iron and had not moved in 20 years. Celeste dropped her leather satchel on the floorboards, took the black coffee, and did not say a single fussy word about the old room, which Rowan deeply appreciated. City folks with deep pockets usually looked around a working cattle ranch like they were secretly pricing every piece of wood in their heads. "I am grateful you let me visit," she said. "Daniel's stake in this ranch is your business to settle." Rowan muttered, "That is not letting you come. That is just the law of the West." "I know." She gripped her cup tightly. "I also know you have been running this entire cattle operation alone since he passed, that you never asked for a hand and surely didn't want one." "I didn't need one." She stared right at him over her tin cup, keeping quiet on that point. Rowan caught on to that little trick of hers almost immediately. She had a way of holding her tongue that cut much deeper than a shouting match ever could. "How long are you fixing to stay?" he asked her. "That all depends on what I find." "What you find?" He leaned back hard in his chair. "Celeste, I am ready to offer you a fair cash payout for Daniel's piece of land. I had it appraised. The price is honest." "I am quite sure it is," she fired back. "I would still like to see the ranch ledgers before we talk dollars." The parlor went dead quiet, save for a ranch hand hammering iron out in the yard. The books he repeated slowly. "The ledgers, the accounts, whatever dusty books hold, your financial numbers." She said it flat out, without a hint of being sorry. "I am not aiming to insult your pride. My daddy ran 4 banks, and my uncle ran 2 more. Listen closely to this. She told him I grew up reading ledger books like other kids read fairy tales. I just need to understand my stake before shaking on a number. Rowan stared her down for a long minute. She held his steady gaze without flinching. Fine by me, he grumbled. I will have Mrs. Hadley make up a guest room for you. She spent that first day doing absolutely nothing Rowan expected her to do. He figured she would skim those ledgers fast. You and I both know better. She wasn't skimming for a quick cash number while ignoring the whole ugly picture. Now you and I'd expect her to find her leverage and negotiate. Instead, she asked to walk the spread. Not ride, but walk. Walk. Rowan sent a quiet young ranch hand, a boy named Cole Ashby, to keep an eye on her. 2 hours later, Cole wandered back looking plenty spooked. She asked the name of every single pasture he told Rowan. Every last one. Asked how long we've run cattle there, and which drown out in wet years. What'd you say? Everything I know. Cole swallowed hard. She wrote it all down. Rowan watched from the barn as Celeste crossed the dusty yard alone. Boots caked in ankle-deep dust, that heavy satchel slung across her shoulder, scribbling away in a little notebook, never looking up. Come sundown, she appeared right in his office doorway. That room was an absolute mess, just buried under towering piles of old receipts and letters. The kind of clutter you get when a proud man tries running a massive ranch without ever asking for clerical help. May I? She asked, nodding at his desk. Ledgers are on the shelf. Take what you need. He walked out. Rowan had an eastern fence line to ride before dusk fell, and frankly, he was mighty glad for an excuse to bolt. Watching her work gave a man the shivers. So quiet, slicing through his private papers without blinking, like she already knew every secret buried there. What the devil? He rode back well after dark, finding that lamp still blazing in his office. Celeste sat parked at his desk, with 3 open ledgers spread out next to a fresh page of her own sharp notes. She shoved his stacked papers aside to make room, which chapped his hide far more than it should have. She never even looked up. I've been studying your winter feed costs, she said flatly. Seems you are paying the Delancey brothers 11 cents above the county average for winter grain. Have been for 4 years now. Delancey supplied this outfit since my daddy's time. They're reliable. They're profitable, she fired right back. Profitable for themselves. She finally met his eyes. That isn't the same thing. Rowan grabbed the spare chair. This wasn't going to be a quick chat. What else? Not exactly a question. You and I know he was just bracing for the storm. Your north pastures, she said. The ones up above the creek line. Just how many acres? About 800. And how many head do you run there? He answered. She spun the ledger around, pointing at the numbers. That is roughly a third of the cattle density those acres could naturally support, based on the thick grass Cole described today. Either that soil just isn't productive enough to justify grazing more beef, or something else is holding you back. Those north pastures flood every 4 or 5 years, he muttered. Daddy lost 200 head up there back in 1861. Always kept numbers low after. Celeste just nodded, scribbling again. 1 bad year 30 years ago. It wasn't just bad. It was an absolute disaster. I understand. She set her pen down and stared straight through him. Rowan, I'm not saying your father made the wrong call. I'm saying you have paid for that choice every single year on land you own outright, without ever recalculating if that ghost of a risk is even real anymore. The desk lamp flickered low. Outside, a restless horse shifted in the corral. I'll need a few more days with these books, she murmured. Take what you need, he grunted, walking away. She took 5 solid days. All that week, Rowan kept the outfit running, same as always, trying mighty hard not to worry about what she might be digging up. He knew his spread wasn't perfect. Nowhere in the West is. But he also knew he'd bled for it honestly. Kept this whole herd alive through brutal droughts, rock-bottom cattle prices, and 2 killer winters straight. That had to mean something. That simply had to count. Come the 6th dawn, she tracked him to the barn where he was helping reshoe a mare turning a bit lame. "Soon as you're finished," she said. "I need to show you my findings." "Good or bad?" he asked, not looking up. "Both," she replied, "but mostly complicated." He finished the mare scrubbed up at the water pump and headed inside. She had scrubbed that desk completely clear now. Her notes sat in neat piles, the old ledgers stacked up with little paper tabs sticking out like pale surrender flags. He sat down heavily. She stayed standing, and he noticed. "I'll start with what works." "Mighty kind of you." She almost smiled. "Your livestock are healthy. Cole says your calving rates are rock solid, and your losses to disease and predators sit way below average for a spread this size. Whatever your boys are doing on the range, it's working." "I'll let them know." "And your water situation beats out most. That creek gives you a lifeline other outfits along this valley simply lack. That brings real value." "I know." "Good, because what comes next is going to sting. You and I both know the truth hurts, so cling to those victories while I say this. Let's set the scene here." She picked up that first page. "Your ranch is losing money. Not dramatically, not all at once, but consistently. It's been bleeding money in real terms for about 9 years. Old Rowan kept his face stone still. "That's just not possible." "I know it doesn't feel possible, but look." She leaned forward, sliding the page right in front of him. "Gross revenue from cattle sales year by year. Now look at operating costs, feed labor, gear, maintenance, taxes, lease payments on those 2 southern sections you don't own outright. That gap between the lines grows wider every single year. Good years you barely break even. Bad years you bleed out your savings just to cover the shortfall. Every ranch hits its savings in a bad year." "Yes, but most ranches come back in the good ones. Yours doesn't. The savings shrink a little more every time." She turned the page. "At this current rate, without some major changes, you'll be dead broke in 4 to 5 years. Maybe sooner if another bad winter hits or beef drops." The room went dead quiet. Rowan studied the numbers. He stared for a good long while. Now, a stubborn rancher never admits defeat quickly when he doesn't want to admit it at all. But these were his own numbers, pulled right from his ledgers, in his own handwriting. There was no spinning them to mean a damn thing else. "You got this wrong," he finally muttered. "Somewhere in there, you got something wrong. Tell me where." "I'd have to go through it myself." "Go ahead," she told him. "I'll wait." So he went through it. Took the better part of an hour. She sat still in that second chair, hands folded, letting him work without a single interruption. Finally, he set the pen down and stared blindly at the wall. "The feed costs," he said. "Yes, and the north pasture." "That too. And Mason." He spat the foreman's name with something not quite anger, but mighty close to it. "You're saying Mason's been shorting supply counts for at least 3 years, from what I can trace, maybe longer. It's small enough each time to stay hidden, obviously, but stretch that over 3 years. It adds up to a chunk you'd notice if you saw it whole." Mason Greer ran his supplies for 11 years, his father's hire. Rowan hauled himself up, walked to the window and stared out. 2 of his ranch hands were crossing the dirt toward the bunkhouse. One waved at something unseen. An ordinary afternoon, the whole spread looking exactly like it always had. "You sure?" he asked. "I'm as sure as ledgers allow." He turned back around. "And you came here for a settlement on Daniel's land." "That's why I came," she said. "But it's not all I found." Now Rowan tossed and turned all night, which honestly wasn't anything new. He hadn't slept soundly in years, though he'd never admitted that to a single living soul. He lay in the pitch black running those grim numbers through his head. You and I know that desperate feeling, hunting for one mistake to magically fix everything, knowing you won't. The worst part wasn't Mason, though. That thief was just a chore that needed quick handling. The real trouble was the north pasture. 800 acres left half-used over something his father witnessed back in 1861. He could still picture exactly how his old man preached about it. Water rising in the dead of night faster than a man could blink. Trapped cattle bawling, then eerie silence. His father told that tale without losing a wink of sleep. He'd tell the tragic tale and simply move on. That was just how men from that rugged generation walked away from bad hands. But Rowan carried that burden like a stone. He kept his herd numbers strictly low, never once sitting down to calculate if the flooding risk still matched what it was 30 years ago. He just blindly assumed. It's funny how a dusty old decision can age out on the trail until it hardens into unshakable fact. He thought about young Daniel, too. 6 years his junior, the poor boy died from a blazing fever that struck fast and refused to break. Frankly, Daniel was never much of a cattleman anyway. He had a wild, restless spirit that couldn't ever stay corralled, but he loved this rough country in his own peculiar way, and he loved Celeste fiercely. Rowan never quite understood their fiery match. Celeste was sharp as barbed wire, exact in ways Daniel completely lacked. But Daniel never seemed to want a soft woman riding beside him. He craved a partner who'd look him in the eye and shoot straight with the truth. Lying there in the shadows, Rowan finally saw that. He saw it plain, though he wasn't rightly sure how it made him feel. Come daybreak, he found her perched at the kitchen table with black coffee and that infamous notebook. He pulled out a chair right across from her. "All right," he grunted. She looked up. "Now I'm not agreeing to a damn thing yet," he warned. "I'm not agreeing that I need to flip everything upside down, sell acres, or fire hands. But I will stop telling you you're dead wrong." That wasn't a generous peace offering by any stretch. She took it without flinching, a quiet toughness the old rancher actually respected. "That's a start," she replied calmly. "What would you do?" he finally asked. "If this spread were yours, what would you actually do?" She just slowly flipped to a page near the back of her notebook. He spotted a neat, precise list written out there, and folks, he instantly knew she'd been sitting pretty, waiting for exactly this question. You see, she penned that list before he even asked. She figured he would come asking. "I would start with Mason," she said, quiet like a drawn gun. "He will deny it." "He will deny it," she agreed. "And you have to choose what you can prove against what your gut knows. That is a whole other tangled rope." "What else?" "The Delancey deal. I can round up 3 outfits within a day's ride that would bend over backward to supply a spread this size. Fair prices, steady hauling. My old man traded with Delancey. Your daddy would not have let a soul skim the supply tally for 3 long years blindly," she murmured softly. He watched the till. "You have been trusting the hands counting the coin instead of riding herd on the books yourself." That truth hit him like a thrown horseshoe. "The North pasture," he muttered eventually. "I want a proper land survey run on it, not some dusty map. Get a fresh scout who understands the rain runoff and deep water tables. If it can graze a larger herd, you are burying hard-earned silver in the dirt every single year. If it cannot, at least the wondering ends." He just stared down into his black coffee. "There is something else," he muttered, "on that list." She waited, then nodded. "The Western Territory." She flipped another page in her ledger. "You got 4 western tracts making absolutely nothing. Grass is bone dry. The water well, trouble. Water is a rough haul, and your herd there cannot cover the county taxes. That dirt holds value, but it sure is not cattle value. It has been Mercer land forever." "I know," she replied. "I am not telling you to sell it off. I am just naming the price of holding on to it." The room fell dead silent. "A railroad crew surveyed 40 miles south of here roughly 18 months back," she added. "Now folks who track the Iron Horse could take a mighty good guess where those next tracks will run." His eyes narrowed on her. "I am not saying sell," she clarified. "I am saying that soil might hold future fortunes completely unrelated to cows, meaning the choice to hold or fold is business, not just family pride. It is cold math." He chewed on that a while. "How do you know about rail surveys?" he asked. "My father's bank bankrolled 2 railway lines," she answered plainly. "I just kept my ears open. Stick with me here." That afternoon brought real trouble far beyond paper ledgers. Rowan was out inspecting a busted south fence when Cole rode up in a cloud of dust. One look at his face told you things had gone completely sideways. "Mason is pulling up stakes," Cole barked. Rowan stood tall. "What?" "Packed his saddlebags an hour back. Told Hendricks he took a gig up north. Never named the town. Hendricks tried hunting you down, but you were already riding the fence line." Rowan froze like a cornered steer. "What all did he steal?" Cole shifted his weight. The cash box from the old tool shed went missing. Had roughly $30, near as Hendricks could figure. $30? He nearly chuckled. 11 loyal years, and he grabs $30 skipping town. "Want me to ride after him?" "No." Rowan stared at the wire. "Let him run. Have Hendricks write down every single account, contact, and dollar Mason ever managed. Every bit. I need to see the entire scope of his swindle before I make my next move." Cole tipped his hat and spurred his mount. Rowan just stood alone by the posts, staring out across the empty plains. A heavy, familiar ache settled deep in his ribs. It was not exactly sorrow, was not pure fury, but something far more bitter. You and I know that gut punch realizing you were dead wrong about a man trusting a snake that just needed time to bite. He shoved that hollow feeling about Mason into a dark corner of his mind and finished out the dusty afternoon. But when sundown hit and he walked indoors, he found Celeste hunched over the office desk once more. Leaning on the doorframe, he sighed. "Mason bolted today." She glanced up. "I know," Cole said. "You do not look shocked." "I am not," she replied. A thief who slowly bleeds you dry gets real jumpy the second somebody starts shining a lantern on the ledger numbers. He likely smelled trouble the day you rode in. Most likely, she nodded. Meaning he laid low before spooking. Which also means whatever he hauled off was a hell of a lot more than $30. Rowan grumbled. "Without a doubt," she answered. He stepped inside and slumped in a chair, carrying that bone-deep exhaustion you only get when ugly truths all hit you at once. "I owe you a real apology," he admitted. She put down her pen. She studied him, debating whether to let the man speak. "I laughed," he said. "That first night you claimed you had proof of the theft, I flat out laughed." "You did," she agreed. "That was not right." "No, it was not," she replied. He nodded slowly. "I am truly sorry." She just stared at him a while, and her stony look finally cracked not a bright smile, just a faint loosening, just like a heavy iron gate swinging open a fraction on its hinges. "Apology accepted," she murmured. She grabbed her pen again. "Now let me show you what else I dug up in the ranch supply records." Over the following days, Rowan started seeing his spread completely differently. It sure was not a comfortable ride. You ever walk through your own cabin in the dark and find someone moved the furniture just an inch? That is exactly how his mind felt. Nothing is a stranger to you, but nothing sits right where you expect it. You just keep blindly grasping for door frames in the wrong spots. For the first time in years, he walked that north pasture himself. He wasn't up in the saddle, which was how he usually covered ground. No, he went on foot, just like Celeste had paced the property that first day. He studied the bunch grass, the dark earth, and how the slope fell away toward the creek. He tried dead hard to see the land for what it truly was, not just the tall tales his old man always spun about it. It was prime grazing country, rich, dark earth that held the rain. Sure, the flood risk was genuine, but a man could manage it. Some ditch work smarter herd rotation. The kind of plain, hard sense that didn't take any miracles. He stood out there a good long while chewing on 30 years of thin herds and the heavy price that stubbornness had cost. His pocket. He wondered why he never once sat down with a paper map, a fresh pair of eyes, and asked if things could run differently. He knew the reason. That was the bitterest pill to swallow. He knew exactly why. He walked back to the homestead, dusty and quiet, and told Celeste. He finally wanted to talk about that land survey. They hunched over the desk together that night. Now that was a rare sight that had never happened before. Celeste on one end with her ledgers, Rowan on the other with the charts. He unrolled massive survey maps of the spread papers so ancient they were turning yellow right at the creases, and she brought her sharp, carefully written math, and together they hammered out the first honest picture of what that ranch was and what it might become. "Right here," she told him, tapping a clean finger on the western edge. "And these two plots especially, they sit the absolute farthest from the water. They have the thinnest grass and lie closest to the planned railroad." "How planned is planned?" he asked. "Educated," she fired right back. "Not promised, but my daddy taught me that in trade. A smart guess, backed by solid facts, is the closest thing to a sure bet you will ever find. And if the railroad never rolls through, you still dumped useless land, using that cash to build up the good pastures you held on to." She leaned back in her chair. "Win or lose, the ranch stands stronger than it does today." Rowan just stared hard at the paper. "Stick with me, folks, because here is the crux of it. Those western sections always felt like the fringe to him, never the beating heart, just dusty proof that his territory was massive. He always felt a quiet, prideful swelling over the sheer size of the Mercer outfit. To him, all that dirt meant honoring his father and his grandfather, and the tough legacy they built. But sitting there in the lamplight with a lady who read ledgers instead of legends, the truth was finally dawning. He saw that acreage sure wasn't the same as true strength, that he had mixed the two up for a long, stubborn time, and that pride cost him dearly. "What would my old man say?" he muttered. He didn't mean to let that slip out loud. It hit the air sounding totally different from the business talk, much quieter, stripped of all his usual grit. Celeste studied the man. Not with an ounce of pity, but with something a fair bit more guarded. "I never knew your father," she told him. "But Daniel talked about the man. Said your daddy made the tough calls without a lick of fuss and just got on with the work." She held her tongue a second. "He also said your father's deepest fear was that once he passed, this ranch would get way too comfortable to survive." Rowan just sat dead quiet for a spell. Daniel really said that. He said it plenty. Rowan stared down at the map. A stray draft hit the room, making the long shadows dance under that low oil lamp. "The man was not wrong," Rowan finally admitted. Celeste stayed quiet as a mouse. She went back to her ledgers, letting the cowboy have his piece. Honestly, it was about the most decent hand anyone had dealt him in a good long while. Once that second week rolled, shut a new wind blew through that old house, though Rowan could not name it. It wasn't that he trusted the Easterner entirely yet. A man like him just wasn't built for a quick turn. But the heavy weariness had lifted. That prickly armor he wore since her wagon rolled up the dirt road was gone. She was still mighty sharp, though. She still spoke hard truths he hated hearing, never apologizing, never sugaring the pill. But there was not an ounce of cruelty in her bite, and this old cowboy finally noticed the difference. One warm evening, he carried 2 tin cups of coffee out onto the porch. He had never fetched coffee for a guest before, yet doing it now felt so natural, it genuinely surprised him. They sat together in the cooling dusk, staring past the yard to the rolling hills. "You heading back east when the dust settles?" he asked. "I mean, after we square up the books." She cradled the warm tin in both hands, just like always. "I have not rightly decided yet. There is absolutely nothing keeping you out here." "There might be," she whispered. And then she gave him that level, fearless gaze she gave to every wild thing, depending on how things shake out. Now you and I know exactly what she meant. Rowan knew it too, but just was not brave enough to speak it. "Pull up a chair." Rowan stared at those rugged hills. "I'd like you to stay," he told her. "That's my stance." "I know," she replied. "I'll consider it," she said. Those ridges turned deep purple in the fading sun, while the breeze carried the scent of brittle grass and a northern chill. Out west, that exact kind of twilight makes a cowboy's most grueling, back-breaking days feel like they actually mean something. Sure enough, that survey crew rolled in on Tuesday. 3 fellas hauling strange gear. They had this cold, professional apathy that rubbed Rowan wrong, yet somehow put him at ease. Celeste hired them through a town connection, some slick outfit her daddy's bank always used to size up local properties. Hearing her say that just drove home a hard truth. She came from a world entirely different from his own dirt-scraped life. He kept his distance, watching them map the North Pasture, trying real hard to convince himself he wasn't sweating their findings. Deep down, he knew he was lying. Around mid-morning, young Cole ambled up beside him, squinting hard at that crew. "You truly believe it drains differently than your old man claimed?" Cole asked. "I don't know," Rowan muttered. "That's exactly the point." Cole went dead quiet. The boy was 26, worked this land 4 years, and had the rare prairie wisdom to keep uninvited opinions firmly locked behind his teeth. That kind of restraint was exactly why Rowan trusted the young hand over most folks. "Miss Celeste seems mighty certain about things," Cole finally offered. "She usually is," Rowan replied softly. "And so far, she's usually right." That seemed to satisfy the cowboy, who tipped his hat and got back to work. The survey dragged on for 2 days. By that second evening, the head surveyor, a stiff, overly calculated fellow named Pratt, a man who spoke pure jargon and didn't care a lick if his news was welcome, laid out his complex maps across the kitchen table. "Let's look at this together." He walked them through the findings. The flooding risk was indeed real, but completely ancient history. The old creek bed had shifted since the 1860s, pushing its main channel almost a quarter-mile down south. That northern slice that washed out back in 1861 wasn't prone to flooding anymore. A bit of honest drainage labor along the eastern rim, maybe 2 weeks of hard digging. Pratt figured that land could hold a much larger herd without risking disaster. Not bulletproof, but a gamble a rancher handles. "What will that dirt work cost?" Celeste asked. Pratt tossed out a price, and it certainly wasn't cheap. Pounding the numbers, she declared the beef profit would pay off that hefty investment within 18 months. "That's assuming cattle prices stay steady," Rowan grumbled. "Only if cattle prices hold," she calmly agreed. She refused to sugarcoat the risks of frontier business. He admired that grit. The lady never fudged the harsh math just to make a man feel safe. But even in a bad market, packing that North Pasture to the brim completely transforms your entire ranching operation. Pratt packed his charts, pocketed Rowan's hard cash, and rode out. That old farmhouse kitchen felt mighty hollow afterward. "Your daddy wasn't a fool," Celeste whispered, staring blankly at the empty grain of the wooden table. He made a solid choice with what he knew then. But facts shift. The very earth shifted. The knowledge just took a while to catch up. Rowan slumped into his wooden chair, pressing rough palms flat against the pine. 30 long years. 3 decades wasting 800 prime acres, all because he blindly trusted an old ghost story that died generations back. He fought hard against doing the brutal mental math on all that lost fortune, but the numbers tortured him anyway. "I should have surveyed this dirt years ago," he muttered. 10 or 50 years ago? "Yes," she agreed. She didn't offer sweet excuses about how he couldn't know. He respected that harsh honesty far more than pity. Now that Delancey supply mess turned out way uglier than anyone ever figured. Rowan figured it was just simple ranch business. Secure a cheaper merchant, cut the heavy ties with Delancey, dust your hands, and move on. What he never saw coming was 62-year-old Harold Delancey, a man who traded with the Mercer Ranch since the old patriarch's days, taking this purely personal. Rowan drove to the Delancey supply yard himself, because out west, that's the only honorable way to handle things. He didn't mail a letter. He didn't make young Cole run his errands. He went in person, because when you're dealing a man terrible news, you look him dead in the eye to say it. Old man Delancey stepped from the office at the sound of the rig, wiping his hands on a shop rag. His weathered face flashed through 3 shades of worry the second he saw Rowan's grim stare. "Rowan?" he greeted. "Harold." Rowan climbed down from the heavy buckboard. "We gotta have a hard talk about that grain contract." They stepped indoors. That cramped office was buried in dusty bills, reeking heavily of fresh pine sawdust and damp dog. Delancey dropped behind his oak desk, squaring his shoulders like a man fixing for a gunfight. 11 cents above county average, Rowan said. For 4 years. My freight costs skyrocketed, Harold. Rowan kept his gruff tone perfectly steady. Don't. Delancey stared holes into his desk. I'm not aiming for ugly. You know how this ends. Rowan said, We've traded a long while, and I respect that, but I'm ending your contract. Pull up a chair. I wanted to tell you myself. It's her, Delancey spat. That woman out there digging through your books. It's the numbers, Rowan countered. She just read 'em. Your father never questioned my pricing. Rowan's eyes went hard. My father is dead, and I should have questioned it years ago. Rowan stood tall. I'll send hands for the remaining gear we loaned you. Have it ready by month's end. Delancey's jaw clamped shut like a bear trap, but he kept his peace. Rowan rode back to the ranch carrying that heavy, bone-deep exhaustion, the kind earned from doing right, when doing right feels dead wrong. When he finally rode in, Celeste was standing out in the dusty yard, jawing with some stranger, mid-40s weathered up like old leather, with the quiet look of a working man. She introduced the fella as Gideon Walsh, a supply runner down from Millhaven. She'd quietly mailed him just last week. Walsh already had a solid quote drawn up. 14 cents cheaper on the dollar than Delancey's bloated rates. His outfit was lean, sure, but he already held 3 other big ranch contracts nearby. And according to the whispers Celeste had gathered, this Walsh was reliable to the point of pure boredom. You already found a replacement, Rowan muttered after Walsh rode off. I had a candidate, she said straight. You decide. You wrote him before I even agreed to end the Delancey contract. Yes. Rowan stared the woman down. What if I'd kept Delancey? Then I'd have written Walsh a letter apologizing for his wasted trip. She stood her ground, not flinching an inch. I was reasonably confident you wouldn't. He should have been mad, but found he wasn't. Reasonably confident, he repeated back. You're a practical man, she said. Once you see something's bleeding you dry, you put a stop to it. You don't pay for stubborn pride. You've known me 3 weeks. I've read 9 solid years of your financial records, she shot back. That tells a body plenty. Now the real hard conversation came 10 days later. It, pardon me, started right at dinner. Started at supper time, a quiet little routine they'd both drifted into without ever shaking hands on it. Mrs. Hadley cooked up the grub and vanished, per usual. Rowan and Celeste would eat with ledgers and maps spread out, or sometimes just the quiet air between them. That evening, she slapped one single paper down next to the cornbread. The western section, she said. Rowan wouldn't even touch the page. I know. I've been eyeing those new rail survey routes real close. She took a seat. There are 3 possible rail corridors, judging by the rough terrain south and west of here. Let's look at this together. 2 routes run so close that your western land would mean pure gold to a buyer tracking those rails. And where is it going? I ain't certain, but I know folks who've got the ears of the railway engineers. She said it flat, no boast in her voice whatsoever. I could ask around. You could ask around. Is that a problem? He stared hard at her rough map, staring right at those shaded western acres. Those tracts were the very first dirt my granddaddy bought in this territory, he muttered. He rode out here with absolutely nothing. Bought those acres before this ranch house or anything else existed. He caught his breath. Used to say that western edge was where the Mercer legacy truly began. Celeste just sat quiet, waiting. I know that ain't a business argument, he sighed. I know it don't fix the ledgers. It's not nothing, she replied, real careful-like. That history is real blood and sweat. I ain't dismissing it. But you aren't your grandfather, she warned. And this outfit's survival won't be saved by the dirt he bought back then. It's secured by the tough choices you make today with the cards you're actually holding. She held silent. He built this spread from dust 'cause he tackled what stood right in front of him, not the ghosts of the past. That's a mighty fine thing to honor. Rowan went dead quiet. That oil lamp threw long, flickering shadows right across the map. "Make the inquiries," he ordered. She gave a single nod. He couldn't rightly say if she was relieved or just expected it. Probably a healthy dose of both, he figured. Stick with me here. What Rowan hadn't fully figured was the ripple effect this had on his boys. He started that season with 12 hands. Of those 12, Celeste had quietly pegged a few without pointing any direct fingers. 3 riders who'd gotten mighty comfortable with the ranch's sloppy oversight. Not outright rustling like Mason did, but skimming the pot in smaller ways, putting down hours they never rode, borrowing ranch gear and conveniently forgetting it. Little grifts piled up under an old boss who trusted without double-checking. But Rowan didn't fire him. He chewed on it, spent one long, bitter night pacing the floorboards, and finally decided he wasn't out to punish yesterday's mistakes, but to fix the present. He pulled each cowboy aside one-on-one, leaving Celeste out of it, 'cause Western disputes ain't settled that way, and spoke his piece. He laid his cards flat on the barrel. Now picture this. The man laid his cards on the table, offering a choice ride under his new rules, or pack up. 2 men stayed. One rode out by dawn without a word. Afterward, Cole walked up to Rowan, wearing a look caught somewhere between downright troubled and quiet respect. "You knew about Hendricks?" Cole muttered. Hendricks was one who stuck around. "Celeste knew," Rowan answered. "I chose to believe her." Cole wrung his worn hat. "He has been here 7 years." "I know. You think he will ride straight now?" Rowan chewed on that honestly. "I think he understands clearly that I am paying attention. Whether that makes him straight or just careful, we will see." Rowan stared at Cole. "I need someone I trust to be my eyes on the ground. Not doing the work for me, just keeping me informed." Cole looked back. "You asking me?" "I am." Cole nodded, put his hat on, and that was that. Settled with barely a whisper exactly how real pacts between hard-working Western men are always struck. The letter from Celeste's Eastern contact finally arrived on a dusty Thursday, and she carried it straight to the barn while Rowan checked the early calves. He read it standing up, like he did with anything holding real weight. The railroad had filed a preliminary route survey with the Territorial Land Office 6 weeks back. The Western Corridor, the exact stretch running right along the edge of the old Mercer property, was their top pick pending final engineering checks. That final review was 18 months out. Rowan slowly folded the paper. "How reliable is this source?" "Very," she answered. He stared at a nearby calf, catching that simple blank gaze only a young animal possesses. "If I sell off now before this survey goes public, you will get cheap grazing prices," she said. "But you will beat every other desperate seller out here to the punch." "Wait and you might get top dollar," she countered. "Or the tracks shift, and that dirt is only worth a handful of hungry cattle again." She stood there with that eerie stillness she always carried. "It is a heavy gamble either way." "What would you do?" he asked. She thought on it. He noticed she didn't rush an answer, something he'd really grown to appreciate. She never just threw out empty words simply to fill the silence. "I would find out who is quietly buying up the Western Corridor," she advised. "Not to match their bets, but if folks with deep pockets and inside knowledge are already circling, that tells you exactly where that iron road is headed. How do I uncover that?" "I will dig," she said. "The land registry is public. I need a few days." "Then take the time." She started turning, but he spoke up. "Celeste." She glanced back. "When you first arrived," he said, "I figured you came to take something." She stayed quiet. "I was wrong about that." She held his steady gaze. "I came to settle Daniel's estate," she answered. "That is still why I am here." "I know," he replied. "But you have done far more." "So have you," she whispered, heading toward the house. He stood with the cabs a while, mind completely empty. He just let the Western afternoon be exactly what it was, rugged quiet, and full of harsh promise. Not what he expected when a simple wagon rolled up that dusty trail a month back, carrying a city woman who read heavy ledgers the way folks read sweet letters from home. Searching that county registry took Celeste 4 solid days, not 3. Rowan never pushed for why. He had learned fast that when this woman asked for time to work a problem, she was not wasting daylight. Pounding on her door for quick updates before she finished the hunt just dug up empty dirt, so he waited. He burned his energy on the heavy drainage work out in the north pasture that started the week prior. Now you and I know ranch work never stops. 2 hands and a hired crew moved heavy earth before the deadly heat hit, digging rough channels to push floodwaters away from the vulnerable lowlands. He slung dirt right alongside them. Rowan always was that kind of rancher. His old man was exactly the same, never ordering a cowboy to do what he would not. But the work felt different lately. He swung that shovel with a fire that had been missing for years. Not just patching broken fences, but reshaping the frontier itself. A minor detail on paper, maybe, but out in the mud, it felt like a total rebirth. As the sun dipped on the 4th evening, Celeste walked out to the pasture. She clutched that ledger, wearing a fierce expression Rowan now knew well. Not scared, just dead focused, like a gambler playing out the final moves of a high-stakes poker hand in her head. "Come up to the house when you finish," she said. "I have something you need to see." That scarred kitchen table had become their war room. It offered more space than the cramped office, better evening light. And honestly, you and I both know they just preferred being close, without ever admitting it out loud. When he walked in, she had the land deeds spread out like a poker hand, right next to a map she'd sketched, penciling in that western corridor. 3 buyers, she said, cold as winter. 3 separate plots snatched up in the western corridor over the past 5 months. Every last one bought through ghosts. Shell companies mostly, or city lawyers fronting for nameless men. Rowan dragged a chair over and sat heavy. "Phantom companies out in this wild country. You and I know that money flows from somewhere," she said, "and whoever's pulling the strings knows exactly where that new railroad is heading." He stared hard at the paper. Those 3 marked plots formed a ragged trail heading southwest. Right through the corridor's edge, sitting cheek to jowl with Mercer's own western acreage. "They ain't snapping up the obvious dirt," he muttered. "No, they're buying the neighbors, meaning they aim to bleed the railroad dry for a premium once the tracks get laid." She tapped the parchment. "Your western acreage is sitting dead center between 2 of these grabs. If those tracks lay down where the surveyors say your property becomes a canyon, that train just has to cross, meaning they gotta buy you out or build around you. And on flat plains, detours cost a fortune." She leaned back. "Rowan, whoever's bankrolling this swindle already knows your land is there. They're betting their boots you don't know what they know." He studied the ink for a long spell. How long until this route goes public? She reckoned 6 to 8 months tops. After that, land values skyrocket across the territory, and your bargaining chip vanishes. She fell silent. "You gotta sell before the whole county smells gold in that dirt. Not after. But if I sell early, they'll figure out my hand." "True." Flips your bargaining stance. She folded her hands. "Stick with me, friend, 'cause this is where the trail gets mighty rocky." "The trail gets rocky," he echoed, deadpan. "Guess everything before this was just a Sunday stroll." A ghost of a smile touched her lips. He tossed and turned that night too, but this was a whole different breed of restless. Those first nights after seeing her ledgers, that was the pure dread of a man staring down a wolf he didn't want to fight. This was a sharper edge. The feeling you get right before pulling a trigger, not after. He lay in the pitch black, chewing on memories of his granddaddy. James Rowan Mercer. The very name he'd been gifted in full. Came to this frontier with a mule, a rifle, and $200. And the kind of frontier grit that either builds an empire or gets a man killed. He bought those western stretches first because they were dirt cheap, solid bedrock right under the boots. Lousy for crops impossible to water. Nobody touched it. He staked that claim because $200 meant no other choices. Out here claiming cheap dust beats holding no land at all. He didn't have some grand vision of wealth. He wasn't some brilliant frontier mastermind. He just stood his ground with the scraps he had, and he refused to let go. Now you and I know gripping dirt just 'cause your kin did ain't honoring them. That night, Rowan saw his granddaddy just acted on pure frontier survival and a lucky break. Honoring his blood meant doing exactly the same. Not worshipping those specific acres, but keeping that frontier willingness to strike hard when the hour struck. He rose before the rooster crowed and penned a letter. He didn't rightly know who the audience was. It was the kind of solitary letter a cowpoke writes to his own soul, wrestling a heavy choice down onto the paper. He tallied up the hard facts he had and the mysteries he didn't, laying out his paths and the bitter toll of each. When Celeste crept downstairs at sunup and spotted him, that letter was already burning in the wood stove. "I'm selling that western acreage," he said. But not yet, and sure as hell not quietly. She poured some black coffee and took a seat. "Lay it out." His plan was rough as a cob at first, and he admitted it. But it held water. If those faceless land grabbers were betting he was blind to the dirt's true worth, he could use their own arrogance as a weapon. He'd have a slick lawyer go poking around, not trying to sell, just whispering about what frontier plots were worth for heavy iron infrastructure. Let those whispers drift into the right saloons and boardrooms. Not a shout, just a breeze. "You want 'em knocking on your door," Celeste said. "No, I want 'em sweating, wondering if I hold the winning hand," he replied. Big difference. She spun her tin cup slow and deliberate. Mighty risky. If you price yourself like gold, they'll just lay tracks around you. With that rocky terrain, can they even detour? She answered, "Not easy, but not impossible either." She chewed on that a moment. You need to jaw with a real track engineer. Someone who can swear if the route is flexible, or if your dirt is do or die. He raised an eyebrow. "You know a fellow like that." "I know of a man," she murmured. "A civil engineer goes by Aldous Vickers. Did the surveying for that big Southern rail extension." Listen close, folks. This scout wasn't cheap and valued his quiet, but if a secret existed, he'd hunt it down. Rowan just stared at her. "You held that name back." "I was waiting to see if you'd ask the right question." He shook his head. Not angry, just the pure wonder of a cowboy still trying to figure out how this woman's sharp mind worked. "How long have you been thinking 3 moves ahead of every talk we've had?" "Since before I even got to town," she said flatly. "I read your ranch ledgers before I came here, Rowan." "The estate copies your lawyer sent. I knew exactly how things stood before I ever stepped foot through your door." He chewed on that a second. "You could have told me from the jump." "You laughed at my findings that first night," she reminded him. "Since you didn't know the numbers, I doubt you'd have wanted a heavy strategic breakdown over our very first cup of coffee." Fair point, he thought. He sure wasn't that kind of man back then. He was slowly starting to realize that he was a very different fella right now. It wasn't on purpose or from one big showdown. It was the heavy weight of weeks having his stubborn frontier assumptions tested against cold, hard reality. "Get a letter out to Vickers," he ordered. It rode out that same day. While they waited, the ranch work forged ahead. They finished digging those northern pasture trenches by week's end. That was moving a whole lot faster than Pratt ever bet on. Rowan figured that was Cole's doing, driving the crew at a perfect trail pace, not whipping them hard enough to break their spirits, but not slack enough to waste daylight. Come Friday, he and Cole walked the fresh dirt, eyeing the steep slopes and those new water outflows. Rowan caught himself thinking. A year back, he would have stood on this very soil and only seen the ruin his old man warned about. Now he looked out at 800 acres of prime potential, knowing 2 weeks of sweat would pay off big in one solid season. "Mighty fine work," he told Cole. Cole just squinted hard at the ditches. "Your daddy never dug this out. Never believed the dirt was worth the trouble." Cole stayed quiet after that, but his tone made it crystal clear to anyone listening. They weren't just talking about moving water anymore. Vickers fired back a reply 11 days later. Miss Celeste opened it first. It had her name on it since she sent the first wire. She carried it out to Rowan's barn, wearing a face nobody could read. "That western trail," she said, "isn't just their favorite option. It's an absolute necessity. The southern dirt is too loose for train tracks. Going north adds 14 miles and cuts right through 3 nasty, dragged-out property blood feuds. The big railroad barons already decided they ain't fighting in court." Rowan dropped his tools right there. "Your acres," she went on, "sit on the only clean passage for 6 miles either way. Vickers actually called your land indispensable, and that man does not throw words like that around." Rowan snatched the letter. Vickers wrote like a true railroad engineer, sharp and shooting straight. No wasted breath, no dodging. Just facts stacked against each other like raw timber. That western spread wasn't just prime real estate. According to a man who'd walked the dirt himself, it was the only way through the territory. "They need us," Rowan muttered. "They need that land," Celeste corrected. "Yeah." He folded the paper up tight. "And those shadowy buyers, they made one hell of a misstep." She figured they bought the neighbor's ranch to flip to the railroad. They needed you acting like a blind fool selling cheap to make it work. Now, you and I know how this game is played. Once you realize your hand, they lose theirs. They'll send a nameless city lawyer soon. When that suit shows up, you don't bargain with the middleman. You look him in the eye, polite but vague, and tell him you know exactly what your dirt is worth. No rush. She stared him down. "The rail bosses will come to you themselves soon enough. A tycoon needing prime acreage doesn't just send one lawyer. They'll keep sending suits until they get a yes. So we wait," she said. "We wait, but we stay sharp." That lawyer wrote in 3 weeks later, exact like she called it. Name of Fitch. Sent from a fancy capital firm with 0 ties to the frontier, which told us everything we needed to know. He wore a mighty expensive suit. The kind of outfit meant to scream serious wealth, flashing a polished, polite smile that never once made it up to his cold eyes. Rowan met him in the front parlor. Not the ranch office where the maps were, and sure not the kitchen. The formal room, exactly as planned. Now here's the trick, folks. Celeste sat hidden in the office with the door cracked. Fitch had no earthly idea. "Mr. Mercer," Fitch started up. "My clients have an interest in a few land claims out in your territory and have—" He cleared his throat. "Pinpointed your western acres as a mighty interesting spot for their new development plans. They're prepared to offer a fair—" "What development plans?" Rowan cut in sharp. Fitch shifted his weight just a hair. "I'm not at liberty to discuss the specific nature." "Then I'm not at liberty to discuss the land," Rowan cut in, cool as creek water. "I don't sell dirt to nameless folks for reasons I can't see. That's been my strict policy since I took the reins of this ranch. Now, you and I know he never actually had that policy, never needed one. But the city suit didn't know that. I understand your caution," Fitch said, trying to recover. "But I assure you, our offer reflects a mighty generous assessment of its agricultural—" "Mr. Fitch." Rowan leaned forward just a fraction. "Those sections hold 0 farming value. Strictly strategic, friend. I reckon your bosses know the difference. That's exactly why they sent a man instead of mailing a letter." He leaned back into his chair. "When those folks are ready to look me in the eye and talk real plans, they'll find I'm a mighty reasonable man to deal with. Until then, my land ain't for sale." The slick talker left under 10 minutes later. Rowan lingered in the parlor as hoofbeats faded down the trail. A second later, Celeste stepped right into the doorway. "Strategic value," she echoed softly. "You used that phrase once," he told her. "Felt like the perfect fit." She just leaned against the old wooden frame. A look crossed her face he hadn't caught before. It wasn't exactly pride. It was the look of a woman sizing up a man and realizing he was worth a lot more than she figured. "They'll come back," she warned him. "I know. With a real number. I know." He got to his feet. "And when they do, I want you sitting right there." She paused for a long second. "You sure about that?" "You know the true price of that dirt better than me," he said. "Plus, you're a hell of a lot tougher to bluff. I know where I fall short." It was the most honest truth he had spoken aloud in a dog's age, and they both felt the weight of it. Giving a single nod, she watched him head out to find Cole. The afternoon rolled on with its usual rhythm, cattle lowing in the near pasture, the ranch hands wrapping up chores by the barn, and that sweet wind blowing off the northern hills where the sweetgrass was growing thicker than it had in years. Now, what Rowan kept to himself, and what she likely guessed, was that her knack for numbers wasn't the only reason he wanted her in that room. He was asking because somewhere, over the last 2 months, making any major move without her by his side started feeling like a dangerous kind of mistake. Not the sort of everyday blunder you could easily patch up with a fresh land survey or a new supplier. He wasn't quite ready to voice that out loud, but the truth was hanging there. Just like a brewing storm before you hear the thunder, real stubborn and firmly planted. Fitch rode back in exactly 17 days later, bringing a totally different kind of silence with him this time. Gone was that slick, friendly act. This man was stepping mighty careful now. He showed up mid-morning without sending word ahead, a move Rowan figured was purely intentional. Just a little test to see if he could catch the rancher off balance and ripe for bending. Rowan was out by the barn when Cole hollered. He took his sweet time scrubbing up at the water pump before heading inside. Not to be rude, mind you, just making it crystal clear exactly who was waiting on who. Celeste was already settled in the front parlor when he arrived, parked in the chair by the window with her ledger open on her lap. She had been baking when Cole ran up, but she took her post without a single word. Rowan noticed the quiet gesture, but said absolutely nothing. Fitch's eyes darted to the woman. You could see the city boy recalculate his odds before smoothing his face over. "Mr. Mercer and Miss or Mrs. Whitaker," Celeste answered flatly. "I am Mr. Mercer's financial advisor." Now, she had never used that title before. Those words hit the floorboards with a heavy authority the slick negotiator absolutely did not see coming. And Rowan kept his jaw locked, but an untamed knot in his chest finally let go. "Of course," Fitch muttered. He unlatched his fancy leather bag, drawing out a single sheet of paper, laying it gently on the table between them. "My clients authorized a formal property offer. After poring over the land surveys and your exact property lines, they came to a figure that reflects the estate's true worth." Rowan slowly picked up the paper. He read the digits, put it down, and locked eyes with Fitch. "Who are your bosses?" "I am not at liberty." "You sang that tune last time," Rowan said. "But you came riding back anyway. That tells me whatever my stubbornness costs them is a hell of a lot cheaper than what they'd lose by going without my land." He kept his tone calm as a Sunday morning. "So let me shoot straight with you, Mr. Fitch. I doubt you're out here offering me farming value or even right-of-way money. You and I both know someone already calculated the exact cost for the railroad to route around my dirt instead of pushing straight through, and I reckon that sum is much higher than what's printed on this paper. Let's pull up a chair, friend." Fitch stayed quiet. He was sharp, but his whole stance just shifted. "I can take any counteroffer to the buyers," he drawled. Then Celeste spoke up, never lifting her eyes from that ledger. "Building that northern alternative route is going to cost the railroad an extra, somewhere between $40,000 and $60,000. That covers the extra track and fighting 3 separate land disputes in a courtroom." She finally looked up. "That is the bare minimum your railroad barons saved by buying Mr. Mercer's property fair and square. That lowball number on your paper doesn't reflect a dime of those savings. It is a starting bid, mister, and a mighty stingy one." Fitch stared at her. He had the look of a city feller who figured this was just a simple frontier land grab, only to realize he was sitting across from folks who knew exactly how to play their hand. "So what price would Mr. Mercer take?" he asked. Rowan leaned in and named his price. He and Celeste had hashed it out days ago, sitting by the lantern light with that surveyor's letter, a property map, and a whole night of hard frontier math. It wasn't born of greed. It was dead accurate. The kind of figure a man can't fight because it was dug from hard facts, not daydreams. Fitch eyed the number, then jotted it down. "I gotta take this to my buyers." Take your time, Rowan replied. We ain't rushing. Truth is, Rowan was rushing on the inside. He'd never admit it out loud, but once that lawyer rode off, Rowan sat on his porch, coffee freezing in his mug. He felt that deep, twisting gut ache of a man who just bet his whole stake and has to pray his hand holds up. Celeste stepped out and took the spare rocker. You reckon they'll bite? He asked. They'll try one more counteroffer, she said. They gotta save face. Otherwise, they look like they folded too fast, raising eyebrows back east. She stared across the dirt yard. But they'll pay up eventually. The raw math just backs them right into a corner. And if they balk, we just wait for the railway bosses to come knocking themselves. Once that train route goes public, our land value shoots straight up into the sky. She took a breath. We hold the high ground, Rowan. Waiting out here makes a person feel small, but we hold all the cards. He watched her. She was tracing the distant ridgeline, holding that tin cup tight. Same way she'd been sitting weeks back before the dust had even started to settle around here. She looked like a woman who had finally carved out a rough kind of comfort out here. What do you want to do? He asked. After the dust settles, he meant. She turned her head sharp. What do you mean, after Daniel's inheritance? The final payout? Once this ranch sale is sealed, the herd is moved and the papers are signed. He caught himself. You'll have real money in your pocket. A whole new trail of options opens up. Where do you want to ride next? You and I know that kind of long silence. It wasn't her hiding the truth. It was a woman facing her own soul before speaking it out to the wind. I just don't know yet, she whispered. Fair enough, he nodded. What I do know, she murmured, is I ain't spent much time dreaming about heading back east. I've been studying this soil's grazing limits and those rail engineer notes, wondering if Cole can handle that north pasture alone when the ranch expands. Those are the things on my mind. She drew a breath. I just haven't thought about riding away. He studied her face, the iron set of her jaw, the proud way she sat. Not rigid, just carrying that fierce independence that didn't need a single soul to prop it up. Then just don't, he replied. She finally looked him square in the eye. Something sparked between them, something rugged and heavy that had been brewing since the first week she got off that stagecoach, stubborn as a wild horse. You are asking me to stay. I'm asking you to chew on it, he said. That's different than begging you to stay because I need an extra hand. I want you here by choice. It's a fine line. You're a cautious woman. I figured you'd appreciate that. She gazed back toward those rocky hills, but the tension in her shoulders had melted away. She settled. Exactly how a lone rider calms down when a secret thought finally gets dragged out into the frontier sunlight. Let me sleep on it, she said. Take all the time you need, he replied, echoing what he told that city lawyer. They both knew it was on purpose. She almost smiled. 8 days later, Fitch's counteroffer arrived on paper, avoiding face-to-face. The sum sat higher than his first bet, but still fell shy of Rowan's asking price. You and I have seen this trick. Just like Celeste called it. He tried splitting the difference, faking a fair handshake while still holding out on the cash. Rowan fired right back through his own counsel, a rock-solid local feller named Carver. That lawyer handled Mercer lands deals for 15 years, never once batting an eye at the wild things folks brought him. Let me tell you, he held his ground. Didn't explain or apologize, just held it. 6 days later, they finally shook on it. The final payout fell 3% shy of Rowan's asking price. But Celeste rightly noted that was just dust in the wind compared to the whole pot. And Rowan took the deal, being a mighty practical man, since chasing that 3% meant burning another month of daylight. Old Carver went ahead and drew up the official papers. They closed the sale that Thursday morning in town. Fitch sat in for those mystery buyers with Celeste right there, sitting beside Rowan, calm as a mill pond, wearing the look of someone who knew exactly how this trail would end. Riding the trail home that afternoon, Rowan stayed mighty quiet. Celeste rode alongside him perfectly at peace with the silence. Rowan valued that deeply. She knew a man needs quiet time for the dust to settle. My granddaddy bought that land for $40, he finally muttered. "I know," she replied softly. "He would think I lost my mind." "No, he would think you got a mighty fine return on $40, she said. "And he would probably ask how you plan to spend all that newfound capital." Rowan just looked at her. "I already know exactly what I am going to do." Now, what he did next was downright strange for ranchers around these parts. He didn't buy more acres. He did not swell the herd, neither. He took that silver from the western sections and poured it straight back into the dirt he already owned. They dug out the north pasture drainage right and proper. It was not just working, but built tough with stone-lined channels at the weak spots, ready to hold fast through the nastiest spring floods. He brought in fresh cattle step by step, just like Celeste advised, watching the dirt heal before adding another head. He swapped out the rusty gear in the south barn, but not in one reckless go, since Celeste mapped out a smart schedule, buying the crucial tools first and stretching those dollars across 2 whole seasons, which beat the devil out of a single massive purchase that would bleed the bank dry. He paid Cole a proper foreman wage. Cole just offered a single nod, skipping any fancy ceremony, which was exactly how Rowan figured the old boy would take it. Now stick with me, because this next part cost him more sweat than any money talk. He pulled every remaining hand aside, looking them dead in the eye about the ranch's future. No grand speeches. He was not wired for preaching, and would have only made a fool of himself. Just quiet, honest chats out in the yard or the dusty barn, telling every single cowpoke what his job was, what the spread expected of him, and what he would get back. Rowan had never done that. Neither had his daddy. His old man ran things by pure grit and silent assumption, which worked for years. But those days were long gone. You and I know how stubborn pride works. But Rowan finally realized folks need to know where they stand. That plain honesty is a respect that costs zero, but yields a mighty harvest. About a week in, Cole moseyed up to him and muttered that Hendricks was looking to have a word. Rowan tracked Hendricks down by the old equipment shed, fussing with a leather harness that did not even need fixing. Just the nervous habit of a fella trying to look busy. "Cole mentioned you wanted to chew the fat," Rowan called out. Hendricks dropped the leather. He was 51, built broad across the shoulders, wearing a leathery face so weathered that smiles hardly ever broke through. "About what I pulled," Hendricks grunted, faking those hours. "We already settled that score." "You laid out the rules for the trail ahead," Hendricks replied. "You never let me say my piece about the wrong I did before." Rowan just stood quiet. "I am not going to claim I had a noble excuse," Hendricks sighed. "I had reasons that felt mighty real back then, but they crumbled to dust when I looked them dead in the eye." He paused. "I have ridden for this outfit 7 years. Plan on 7 more. I would rather own up to my sins than let that bad blood fester silently between us on the trail." Rowan studied the man for a long minute. "All right," he said. "I hear you. That is all I wanted. Then we are square." Rowan agreed. It was a gritty conversation. It didn't end with a neat bow or leave either man smiling. Hendricks turned back to his leatherwork. Rowan tipped his hat and walked off, and neither man ever spoke of it again. But that heavy shadow hovering like a storm cloud between them shrunk down mighty fast after that, and eventually it blew away like dust, the way honest confessions usually do. The spread struck real profit faster than Rowan ever reckoned. Celeste just smiled, knowing that always happens when you stack smart ranching upgrades into one single season. The growing northern herd. The cheaper hay secured under that solid Walsh contract, which proved rock solid alongside old coal, quietly wiping out the lazy ranching habits over those long preceding months. "Pull up a chair. You and I are looking at Carver's yearly tally." Rowan read that bottom line twice. Not exactly a wild fortune. It didn't come from a lucky weather break or some crazy beef market. It was just a frontier ranch finally running the way it was truly meant to for the first time in 10 long years. That evening, he hauled those papers to the kitchen table, sliding them right in front of Celeste without a single word. She looked. Setting it down, she stared at the worn wood. "How does it feel?" she asked. "Strange," he answered her, dead honest. 15 years riding herd on this outfit, and I never knew it could produce this." You lacked the facts, she noted. I didn't hunt for them, he admitted. That ain't the same thing, he muttered. She met his eyes. No, she replied softly. It sure isn't. They let that truth settle in. Outside, a cool evening wind rolled off the western hills, and the spread was just doing what cattle operations do at sundown, settling into familiar rhythms. Distant cows lowing, horses stamping, and the steady chores of a property being put to bed. Rowan had breathed those noises his entire life on the range. He knew every single little change in the wind, but tonight it rang out different than it had in years. Not louder, just solid, like a busted wagon wheel finally trued up and rolling right down the trail again. Celeste, he rumbled. She raised her eyes. Gotta ask you something, and I want a straight answer, no polite fluff. I'm not exactly famous for sweet talk, she replied. I know. Why do you think I'm asking? He folded his calloused hands together. Do you actually want to stay out here? Not because the herd needs tending, or you've got no other trail to ride, but because this dirt is where your heart sits. She held his steady stare. She took her time proving she meant every word. Yes, she told him. This is exactly where I belong. He gave a slow nod. He wasn't one to wear relief on his sleeve, but the tight set of his broad shoulders finally dropped. Then I've got one more question for you, he murmured. She tilted her head, waiting. I want to ask you right and proper if you'll let me. She went quiet for a spell. Out by the near corral, you could hear a tired horse shifting its weight under the starlight. Ask, she commanded softly. He asked. She said yes. Now you and I know ranch life is tough. She didn't answer right off, giving him a look that meant she accepted those harsh frontier realities coming her way regardless. It was the sort of yes a woman gives when she's pondered the trail ahead, just biding her time to see if the right cowboy would finally speak up. Sure wasn't some fancy parlor romance. Mrs. Hadley was sitting just one room over, likely eavesdropping on every single spoken word, and the old oil lamp desperately needed its wick trimmed, while Rowan's hands were battered from throwing calves still stained with axle grease. But it was genuine, and neither of them would ever settle for cheap imitation goods. That honest, dusty edge made the whole quiet moment exactly what it was meant to be. They tied the knot come springtime, just 6 weeks after she gave him her word. It certainly wasn't a giant hoedown. Neither wanted a big crowd. Rowan always hated wearing a suit, and Celeste had already survived one trip down the aisle back east, some stiff city affair packed with snooty bankers featuring flowers that cost more than a top hand's monthly pay. She had zero desire to ride that trail twice, so they got hitched right in Carver's front parlor, which moonlighted as a justice's office, with Cole and Mrs. Hadley serving as their witnesses, wrapping the whole show by noon so Rowan could fork afternoon hay to the herd. Mrs. Hadley started bawling, which shocked the boots off everyone, even herself. Cole gave Rowan a firm handshake, and after pausing a beat, shook Celeste's hand too, which she took with that steady, no-nonsense grit she applied to everything. Riding the wagon back home, sitting shoulder to shoulder on a dirt trail they both knew by heart, Celeste finally spoke up. Your crew will figure this out by supper time. Cole will spill it, Rowan chuckled. Probably did already. You fretting over how the boys will handle it. He chewed on that thought. Some will flap their jaws. Cowboys always have loud opinions about trail changes they didn't predict. He threw her a look. But they respect how this ranch turned around lately. They feel that success deep in their bones, and they know whose brains saved our hides. Yours just as much as mine, she shot back. Don't be polite about it, he grinned, tossing her own words right back, which she rewarded with a sharp little look. You and I know how ranch hands are. They took the boss's personal news with a few private grumbles, but mostly reckoned it wasn't any of their business. Harris just tipped his hat when Cole spoke, barely surprised. A couple greenhorn buckaroos mumbled some jokes that Cole smartly never repeated to Rowan. Good thing, too. The brutal work carried on, the cattle grazed. The western frontier has a funny habit of swallowing massive personal shifts and just marching steadily onward. Truth is, what really changed, after those quiet vows, wasn't exactly wild. Listen here. It was the kind of shift that hits when two folks stop haggling over the terms and just start living out the deal. Celeste finally hauled her belongings from the spare room right into the master quarters, which meant shifting heavy oak furniture around for an entire Saturday afternoon, leaving Rowan with a busted hand from a bedpost he didn't quite dodge. She claimed the north side of the study desk once a sprawling graveyard of old receipts, and whipped it into a strict new order that the man was absolutely forbidden to mess with. He took it on the chin without grumbling, mostly because her way beat his total mess. Now turns out she wasn't exactly a breeze to share a roof with every day. She held fierce opinions on how chores ought to be run, and fired them off without blinking. Worst part? She was usually dead right, which just rubs a man wrong. She never sugarcoated a dispute just to keep the peace. She spoke her piece plain and demanded he do the same. And when they locked horns, which happened plenty, it wasn't a bitter range war. It was more like two strong folks hammering the dents out of a wild new idea. Rowan wasn't a walk in the park himself. He carried years of dusty bachelor habits that flat out refused to wash away overnight. He caught dark moods straight off the dirt itself. Bitter weather ailing steers, busted tractors. He dragged all that trouble indoors without even realizing. He wasn't the hugging type, and sometimes she had to spell out exactly what she needed, things a softer fella might have just handed over. In plain English, they were just two flawed, mule-headed folks trying to saddle up for a shared ride neither of them ever really saw coming. It wasn't a pretty dance, but it was true. And as the seasons turned, truth proved to be enough. By their second full season, the proof was in the dirt. That old north pasture was kicking out grass at nearly double its usual clip, and their new ditching survived the heavy spring melt without washing out once. Rowan noticed this quietly, standing by that rushing creek one damp April morning. He didn't holler about it, but he felt a bone-deep, quiet kind of pride. His old man's fear had been genuine, but the dirt had shifted, and he had learned to shift right with it. Walsh's feed deal renewed smooth and at a finer price because Rowan finally learned to bargain hard instead of blindly trusting. That lesson bled him for years and cost a small fortune, but it was baked into his bones now solid. The way a hard truth sticks when you pay for it in blood and lost dollars. Stick with me here. Young Cole stepped into the foreman boots with a calm grip that shocked even himself, he confessed, while stringing barbed wire with Rowan one afternoon. He rode the ranch hands a lot harder than Rowan figured. Not mean just absolute, the way a green boss acts before he learns the danger of easing up at the wrong second. Rowan let the boy find his footing. He remembered being 26 and testing out where the borders laid. The Mercer outfit's name had taken on a new shine in the valley, hard to pin down exactly, but Rowan felt the heavier respect down at the supply depot and in Carver's waiting room, and whenever cattlemen crossed paths in town. The Mercer spread was always famous for being massive. Now it was praised as a tight ship, drawing a whole different brand of honor. 3 neighboring cattlemen actually rode over last year just to pick his brain on grazing rotation and grain deals, which he answered straight up, keeping his cards face up on the table. He wasn't born to hand out free wisdom like that. His gut instinct was to hoard every hard-earned trick, but Celeste shot straight with him. "You were helped," she reminded him, when he balked at sharing with a neighbor named Tully who asked about the drainage. Not so long ago either. So he gave Tully the whole blueprint. Then, by their 3rd year, the mighty railroad finally knocked on the front door. They didn't send Fitch this go-around, but a heavy-hitting company suit named Garland, who rode in with a mapping crew and the swagger of a fella who always takes the pot. He drove right up to the porch, which earned Rowan's nod, and took a seat at the kitchen table, skipping the parlor, since the kitchen was where the real cattle business went down these days. He laid out the iron horse pitch, plain and simple, skipping Fitch's slick tap dance. Those western acres were dead essential to the main track line. All that acreage Fitch brokered quietly had finally been folded under the big railroad's mighty shadow, explaining those ghost buyers Celeste had tracked in the county books. That dirt belonged entirely to the rail barons now. The Mercer dirt was the only piece missing. We've been holding out for the final surveyor's stamp. Well, friends, we know what's coming. Garland said, "We have it. You're on the route." "I know," Rowan replied. Garland just stared at Celeste, her ledger wide open. "Listen here." Garland was a fella who adapted mighty fast. "Then you know the railroad needs this land," Garland said. "We know," Celeste fired right back. "Been expecting this talk for 18 months. Garland studied her a whole lot closer now. "You've been expecting it." "Ran the numbers a while back," she said. "We know exactly what this dirt is worth to your operation, and what going around us costs. We got a figure in mind. It is square. Square for the both of us, not just us. Rather settle this today than haggle for 3 months and land right back here." Garland leaned back in his seat. He stayed quiet, figuring his odds like a poker player. "You aren't gonna hold us over a barrel." "That number is high enough, we sure do not need to," Rowan chimed in. "Besides, we'd rather see tracks through this county than make bitter enemies out of folks we gotta live alongside for the next 50 years. That was a whole lot of words for Rowan. Celeste did not even glance his way while he spoke, but he could tell by the hard set of her jaw that she approved. They hammered it out in just 2 meetings and 11 days, blistering fast for any frontier deal. Old Garland proved to be a practical sort of fella, making things run smooth. The final payout matched her math, plus a little extra. Turns out Garland's railroad engineers found a sweet grade advantage on Mercer land, throwing a nice little premium on top of the baseline price. With the ink dry, Rowan just sat there in Carver's office a spell, long after the railroad boys packed out. He stared hard at the paper sitting right in his hands, seeing a dollar amount bigger than any check the Mercer spread had ever cashed. Carver muttered, "Your granddaddy would surely have opinions on this." Rowan nodded. "He would." He folded the paper up tight. "He'd also demand to know my plan for that cash." "Well, what is the plan?" Rowan just looked past the door where Celeste waited out in the dusty street by the horses. He watched her through the glass. Standing tall, cool as a morning breeze, entirely silent. She was studying that frontier town like a hawk, looking with the sharp eyes of somebody who aims to truly understand a place. "Build something," he whispered. "Something that outlasts me." Now, you and I both know what they built after that wasn't some fancy monument. It was a working cattle ranch, and it worked mighty fine. No more bleeding cash and blowing chances like they had for a decade. Not after Celeste rode in with her carpetbag and a sharp habit of asking folks mighty uncomfortable questions. That big north pasture became the beating heart. Grazing cattle smart and rotating them right, a job Cole handled better every day. Wagons and gear got fixed on schedule, not when they busted down. They checked the ledgers every single season, not just at year-end, side by side. Rowan learned the hard way that knowing your own math was never optional. Handing off the books is how good ranchers got robbed blind by trusted friends. He paid a bitter price for that lesson once, and he never forgot it. As the years rolled on, Celeste took the reins on the money strategy. Made sense, seeing her natural talents, but she treaded real careful. And Rowan eventually saw exactly why she did it. She never made him feel like his outfit was stolen and fixed up. It was always a conversation. Always 2 partners talking. Even when she was dead right, she brought ideas to the table instead of barking orders. Took him a spell to figure if that was instinct or strategy. Turned out it was both. "You could just tell me," he told her one night, after she spent 20 minutes walking him through a big choice he reckoned she had already made her mind up on years ago. "I sure could," she smiled. "But you are running this spread, not me. And a choice you truly understand is one you can defend when I'm not standing here beside you." He chewed on that a while. "You're thinking about not being around," he said. "I'm thinking about making sure this outfit doesn't rely strictly on my presence." She told him those were 2 different things, a mighty careful distinction. He had preached that years ago, and now he finally saw the flip side. A ranch survives because the roots are dug in deep and sound, not just because one lone cowboy was propping it up. He spent his first 15 years running that land like his shadow alone kept it alive. Now he knew just standing there was never enough. It takes presence mixed with sharp grit, honest books, and the guts to admit you are dead wrong. That is what holds a frontier legacy together. The blistering summer their little girl was born, Rowan sat by that window all night long, refusing to sleep, not quite scared. The birth went smooth, and Celeste was resting. You and I know that feeling. Just sitting quiet with the heavy weight of a blessing. He called that baby Josephine, after absolutely nobody in particular. Now, you and I know that was Celeste's doing. She wanted a name that was purely the girl's own, completely free from anyone else's ghosts. He cradled her in that cold dawn light, a tiny red-faced, howling little creature without a single opinion yet. And he sat there, recalling his granddaddy buying $40 of dirt that the railroad later paid a king's ransom for. He remembered his daddy losing 200 head of cattle to high water, making a panicked choice right then that haunted this ranch for 30 years. He thought on Mason Greer, silently skimming off the top for 11 years, simply because nobody bothered to keep a sharp eye on the herd. He remembered Celeste rolling into town, tearing through 9 years of dusty ledgers in just 5 days, and handing him the cold, hard truth about his operation. He pondered all the quiet ways a man's life can drift completely off the trail. Not from one big storm, but from a slow pileup of ignored mistakes, of outdated, stubborn habits, blind loyalty given without proof, and old traditions followed without a single question. How a fella can believe deep in his bones he's running a fine cattle outfit, only to be dead wrong until someone without an ounce of pity reads the math. The man was purely lucky, and he knew it deep down. Not just stumbling into gold, though he'd had a little of that. The luck of a stranger showing up right on time, stubborn and honest enough to call it exactly like she saw it, and him finally swallowing his pride long enough to listen. Any other season of his life, he probably would have chased her right off his porch. Maybe the good Lord opens a narrow window for those hard reckonings, a time when a cowboy is beaten down enough by his own pride to finally see the light. He had been standing right on the cliff edge of ruin, close enough that the ledger books couldn't hide the drop. Maybe staring down that canyon made him listen. Or maybe it was just the sheer force of Celeste, the unique steel of that woman. How she could be tough, precise, and completely right without ever being mean. How she let him find the bitter truth on his own, instead of swinging it like a judge's hammer. Whatever the reason, he was deeply grateful. Grateful in that quiet, dusty way of a man who rarely wastes breath on feelings. He didn't have to speak it aloud, because you could see that gratitude in absolutely every single chore he tackled. This rugged piece of land outlasted them both, but that is just the nature of dirt. Cole made foreman and earned the title by the time Rowan hit 50. He ran that western cattle operation with a quiet mastery, a long way from the greenhorn who memorized pasture names just to impress a pretty girl he'd just met. He married a gal from over the ridge who held strong opinions about bookkeeping, a fact that always made Celeste smile quietly to herself. Little Josephine grew up right out on that north pasture, watching the herd and reading profit sheets before she even knew how to braid her own hair. That was her mama's doing, backed by her daddy's quiet nod. She inherited Rowan's stubborn streak and Celeste's sharp eye. Any cattleman doing business with her quickly learned she was an absolute force of nature, and she didn't want to be anything but that. Neighboring ranchers came calling over the years. Not all of them, and rarely with their pride swallowed. Some rode over because their outfits were dying, and they knew the Mercer spread had survived a much darker valley. Some just came out of pure curiosity. Others showed up because their pride finally wore thin enough to beg for a lifeline. Rowan sat them down and shared everything. Listen here. He told them the exact same truths Celeste gave him. He spoke in the plain, dusty words of a man who took his beatings and didn't want to see another fellow bleed the same way if it could be avoided. He ordered them to read their own ledger books and never trust another living soul to do the math. He told those boys that an old ranching tradition was only worth a damn if it still did the heavy lifting it was built for. He warned them the deadliest lie a cattleman could swallow was that a bigger herd meant a safer future, or that the old trail was the only trail you were allowed to ride. But he never once claimed it was easy. It wasn't. None of this frontier life ever was. There's a nasty habit of lying when men spin yarns about building empires. The bloody struggle always gets neatly ironed out around a campfire, all those pacing midnights. And those moments of sheer freezing terror get polished up into some genius master plan instead of desperate last-second rescues. Old Rowan refused to tell a tall tale like that. He had survived the muddy, ugly truth, and that gritty truth was the only story worth sharing. So what do you and I learn if a hard-fought life carries a lesson usually buried deep inside a heap of complicated choices? It wasn't that the smartest folks always win, or that good ledgers save your hide. It was something far simpler and much tougher to swallow. It was that having the guts to admit you are dead wrong isn't a weakness. Out here, it's the only way you ever end up being right. Pull up a chair, friend. For years, Rowan reckoned changing his daddy's ways was flat-out betrayal. He gripped the ghost of his father's old ranch so darn tight, it blinded him to the hard dirt reality of what the spread had actually become. Took a sharp-tongued woman with a carpetbag and zero patience for fairy tales to set him straight. She proved that honoring folks who rode before you ain't freezing their old choices in solid amber. Listen here, it means bringing that same raw frontier grit right into your own struggles, staring reality dead in the eye instead of chasing shadows, and having the sheer guts to act on it. His granddaddy pulled that exact trick with $40 and one stubbornly ornery mule. His old man did it too, stumbling through the big flood, just making the best call a desperate man could. And at 43, Rowan finally manned up and did it. Backed into a corner by grief-red ink and a woman refusing to sugarcoat the bitter math. The spread stood strong. The land held firm. Spring grass always greened up that north pasture, untouched by high water for 20 years, and likely safe forever. Even if the river rises again, those drains are rock solid. That is enough. More than enough. You and I know that's just the gritty, unglamorous, honest way of real things. Everything.